You pass the bar exam on your first attempt. Not because you're the smartest person in the room, though you might be, but because you studied the way other people breathe. Constantly, automatically, without needing to remind yourself to do it. Law makes sense to you in a way that other things never quite did. It has architecture, internal logic, rules that connect to other rules in patterns you can trace backward and forward simultaneously. Your professors tell you that you think like a judge. They mean it as the highest possible compliment. You open a practice at 30. Corporate litigation, business disputes, the occasional high-profile divorce where one party owns companies the other party didn't know existed. Your office is on the 14th floor of a building made of glass and imported stone. You charge rates that make clients wince and pay anyway, because you win. Not sometimes. Consistently. Your record after 4 years is the kind of record other attorneys print out and put in drawers and look at when they need to feel bad about themselves. You are, by every visible measure, exactly what you set out to be. The call comes on a Tuesday afternoon between 2 meetings. The voice is unhurried. A man who has learned that urgency is something you project onto other people, not something you carry yourself. He asks if you handle criminal defense. You tell him your practice is civil. He says he understands. He says he has a situation that requires someone with your specific quality of mind. He uses that phrase, quality of mind, and you notice it because it's precise in a way that casual conversation rarely is. He says a family member has been detained. Serious charges. He says the lawyers he's spoken to so far have been adequate. He says adequate is not what this situation requires. You tell him to have someone send you the file. The file arrives within the hour. You read it twice. The charges are real, the evidence is substantial, and somewhere inside the arrest documentation, there is a procedural gap so clean and so exploitable that it almost looks intentional. You know it isn't. You know because you've spent 10 years reading police work, and you know what intentional looks like. This is carelessness. This is an officer who was confident enough in his case not to check whether the authorization he was acting on had actually been properly issued. You call back. You say you've reviewed the materials. He asks what you think. You tell him there's an argument to be made. He says good. He says he'll have someone come by tomorrow morning. The man who appears at your office the next day doesn't look like a client. He looks like someone who has spent his entire adult life being the most dangerous person in any room he enters, and has become so comfortable with that fact that it no longer requires any performance. He sits down without being invited. He sets a leather case on your desk and opens it. The money inside is arranged with a neatness that suggests someone spent time on it. He says this is a retainer. He says the rest comes when the matter is resolved. He says the family is grateful for your time. You look at the money for a moment that lasts longer than you intend. You tell him you'll need full access to the arrest documentation and the evidence log. You tell him the hearing is in 61 hours and that you'll need that time without interruption. You tell him to have your client presentable and composed for the judge. He nods. He closes the case and leaves it on your desk. He stands up and walks out. You sit with the case in front of you for approximately 4 minutes. Then you open your laptop and begin to work. The hearing lasts 40 minutes. The prosecutor is competent but unprepared for the specific argument you bring. He expected a procedural defense. Minor objections, scheduling delays, the ordinary friction of criminal litigation. What he gets instead is a surgical dismantling of the authorization chain. You cite 7 precedents. You walk the judge through the exact sequence of events that rendered the entire arrest legally compromised. You are calm, precise, and completely without theater. The judge rules in your favor. Your client walks out of the courthouse into daylight that he would not have seen for the next 8 to 12 years, if not for a gap in a piece of paperwork and your ability to find it. Outside, the man from your office the day before is waiting by a car. He looks at you with an expression that is not quite gratitude and not quite respect, but something that contains elements of both. He says the family would like to meet you. The man who leads the organization is not what you expected, though by this point, you've stopped expecting anything. He's younger than his reputation. Educated, he speaks in complete sentences with correct grammar and occasional references to things he's read. His operation generates more annual revenue than several legitimate companies you've represented. He runs it with the same attention to structure and process that those companies apply to their quarterly planning. He tells you he needs someone who understands systems, not muscle, not loyalty in the traditional sense. He needs someone who can look at a legal problem the way an engineer looks at a structural failure. Identify the precise point of weakness and address it with the minimum necessary intervention. He offers you a monthly arrangement that would take your current practice 3 years to match. He says the work is defense only, purely legal. He says this with complete composure, which tells you both that he believes it and that he understands it isn't entirely true. You tell him you need to consider it. He tells you to take the weekend. You don't need the weekend. You need approximately 40 minutes sitting in your car outside the restaurant before you understand that you already know what you're going to say. The question was never whether. The question was when you would stop pretending the answer wasn't obvious. You learn the architecture of the organization the way you learn the architecture of law. Systematically, patiently, with attention to the relationships between components rather than just the components themselves. The legal work is, at first, genuinely legal. Defense hearings, writs of protection, appeals based on procedural irregularities. You are extremely good at this because you were extremely good at it before any of this started. The difference is the volume and the stakes. Cases that would have taken months now run concurrently. You build a small team, 3 junior attorneys who are talented and ask few questions. And you manage them the way you manage everything, with clear structure and high standards. Your success rate is not something you discuss publicly, but people discuss it anyway. The first line you cross doesn't feel like crossing a line. That's the mechanism nobody explains to you. There's no moment where you stand at a threshold and make a conscious choice to step over it. There's just a gradual narrowing of the distance between what you will do and what you previously would not. Until one day you look back and the threshold is somewhere behind you in the distance, and you can no longer identify exactly when you passed it. A judge mentions, in passing, that his son is applying to a university program with a competitive enrollment process. A week later, through a foundation connected to 3 shell entities connected to an account you manage, a scholarship is created. The judge doesn't call to thank you. He doesn't need to. The next hearing goes well. You tell yourself this is how the world has always worked. You tell yourself that every large firm you've ever competed against operates in the same gravitational field of favors and relationships and strategic generosity. You tell yourself the only difference is that your clients wear different clothes. The telling yourself takes less time each month. Eventually, it stops being necessary. The cases escalate in the way that everything in this work escalates, gradually, then suddenly. A commander facing 7 charges, a logistics coordinator wrapped in a federal investigation that has been building for 2 years, a border operation whose entire legal exposure lands on your desk as a single file that weighs, physically, over 4 kilograms. For each one, you find something, a gap in the evidence chain, a witness with an undisclosed prior, a jurisdictional question that creates enough procedural complexity to delay proceedings by 18 months. You are not winning these cases in the traditional sense. You are making them expensive and complicated and slow enough that the system eventually decides to spend its resources elsewhere. In criminal law, time is not a resource. Time is the product. Every month, a client remains outside custody as a month of operational continuity. You understand this earlier than you'd like. Your private life contracts, not dramatically, not in a single event. It contracts the way daylight contracts in winter, incrementally, consistently, until one evening you look up and realize the light is gone, and you can't identify the exact day it left. Your relationship ends. She doesn't ask for an explanation, because the explanation is visible in everything. The hours, the security arrangements, the way you've stopped being fully present in rooms that don't involve work. She packs with the efficiency of someone who made this decision weeks before she acted on it. At the door, she says she doesn't recognize you anymore. You don't tell her that you do, that you recognize exactly who you are, and that this is the thing that keeps you awake at 3 a.m. with a drink you poured an hour ago and haven't touched. You move into a different apartment, larger, more secure, a building where the concierge knows not to announce certain visitors, and the parking structure has a private exit. You tell yourself it's practical. The surveillance begins subtly enough that you almost miss it. A vehicle that appears in your peripheral awareness across 3 different locations in a single week. A contact in the federal attorney's office who becomes slightly less available. A junior attorney on your team who starts arriving early and staying late and accessing files that don't belong to his case assignments. You don't confront any of this directly. You note it. You adjust. You begin operating on the assumption that everything you say in your office is being recorded and structure your communications accordingly. The paranoia is not irrational. That's the part that's hardest to explain to people who haven't lived inside it. Every precaution you take is proportionate to an actual risk. The threat assessment is accurate, which means the fear is accurate, which means you spend your days in a state of calibrated, sustained, entirely justified dread. You check your car every morning before you start it, not because you think something is there, because you know the probability is low but not zero. And you've become someone who lives inside the non-zero probabilities. The boss's arrest is a media event. Helicopters, coordinated federal action across 4 states. Press conferences where officials use your client's name in the same breath as numbers designed to communicate scale. Kilograms, kilometers, years. You watch it on a screen in your office and feel, with professional detachment, the weight of what the next phase of your work will require. The file they build against him is the largest you've ever seen. The government has been constructing it for years, methodically, with a patience that mirrors your own. There are intercepts. There are protected witnesses. There is financial forensic work that traces structures you helped design. You build a team of 11 attorneys. You work in shifts. You attack the file the way you've always attacked files, looking for the places where the architecture is flawed, where the process deviated from what the law requires, where the evidence was handled in ways that create arguable contamination. You find enough to work with, not enough to win. Enough to make winning something the government has to pursue through years of legal complexity rather than a straightforward prosecution. You turn a 6-month trial into a 3-year procedural marathon. You file writs. You appeal rulings. You challenge witness qualifications and evidence chains and judicial competencies. You generate so much procedural friction that 2 judges recuse themselves before the case even reaches substantive argument. The third judge makes a small error. Technical. Procedural. The kind of error that exists in 100 cases that nobody ever reviews closely enough to find. You find it. The day your client walks out of custody for the second time, you are not there. You are in your apartment at 11 p.m. with a glass of something you've been drinking too much of for about a year. You receive a message that contains one word. You read it. You set the phone face down on the table. You sit there for a long time. You have defended this organization through 41 cases. You have maintained an 89% success rate across the matters that should have been statistically impossible. You have built legal structures that will take government forensic accountants years to understand. You have created a framework of procedural delay and evidentiary challenge that functions as a permanent protective layer around an operation that moves product through 3 countries and generates revenue that appears in the accounting of hotels and car dealerships and agricultural businesses that look, from the outside, completely ordinary. You are 44 years old. You look older. Your doctor has opinions about your blood pressure and your sleep patterns that you have stopped engaging with honestly. You have accounts in jurisdictions that require significant legal expertise to locate. You have 3 forms of identification that are not your name. You have, in the past 18 months, been quietly moving resources toward a contingency you haven't named yet, but whose shape you recognize. The summons arrives on a Wednesday. Federal investigators, voluntary interview. You know what voluntary means in this context. You bring 2 attorneys. You answer questions about specific cases with attorney-client privilege. You are precise, composed, and entirely unhelpful to their investigation. That evening, the organization's current leadership, the second generation, colder and less patient than the first, calls you. The question they ask is simple. It contains 1 word more than it needs to. And that extra word does all the work. You tell them what they want to hear. Afterward, you sit in your car in the parking structure for 20 minutes with the engine off. The question they asked, the word they used, the tone of the silence before they spoke. You have been an asset. Assets have a natural lifespan. The moment an asset's risk profile changes, the moment keeping it becomes more dangerous than replacing it. The calculation shifts. You know this. You built systems your entire career on understanding exactly this kind of calculation. You start your car. You drive home. You open your laptop. You have been preparing for this contingency for 18 months. You need 90 more days. The raid happens on a Thursday morning before dawn. You hear them before you see them. The specific acoustic texture of coordinated entry, multiple points simultaneously, the kind of operation that is designed to prevent decision-making by eliminating the time required for it. You are out of bed and standing in the center of your bedroom before the first door opens. They are professional. They are thorough. They read you your rights in a tone that suggests they've done this many times, which they have. Outside, the street holds cameras. Later, you'll see the footage, your face, your hands, the particular expression of someone who understood this moment was coming and is discovering that understanding it did not prepare them for it. The charges are 23 in total. Each one is a chapter of the past 12 years. In the holding cell, waiting, you think about the student who approached you after a lecture 2 months ago. She said she wanted to be like you. She meant it as a compliment. You told her to choose a different path. She thought you were being modest. You were being honest for the first time in longer than you can accurately measure. The prosecutor's offer arrives through your attorney. The terms are what you expected. The alternative is what you already knew. You have 48 hours. You sit on the narrow bench and look at the wall across from you and think about systems, about the architecture of decisions, about the distance between the person who passed the bar exam on the first attempt because the law made sense to him, because its internal logic was beautiful in its precision, and the person sitting in this cell who used that same logic to dismantle justice case by case for a decade. You think about the line you crossed the first time, how small it seemed, how invisible the threshold was until you were already past it. You think about all the lines after that, how each one was smaller than the last, how the distance between them compressed over time until crossing one and standing at the next became a single fluid motion you performed without noticing. The law you loved didn't fail you. You failed it slowly, incrementally, in ways that always felt justified. Until justified stopped being a word that meant anything and became just a sound you made to fill the silence. 48 hours. You already know what you're going to do. You just need a little longer to decide whether you can live with it. This is fiction. If this one stayed with you, drop a comment. Subscribe for more.